Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith describes price patterns in corn and soybeans. Greg Ibach looks at the potential for U.S. beef trade. Matt Luebbe discusses water restrictions in the feedlot. And Tom Hunt talks about rootworm control in corn. Roy Smith is our market analyst this week. The USDA's February crop report indicates U.S. farmers will face stiff competition from sizable harvests in South America. In its latest supply and demand numbers Tuesday, the agency increased the sizes of Argentina's corn and soybean crops, along with Brazil's output in corn. It also maintained its expectation for a record soybean crop of 100 million metric tons in Brazil. We talked with Roy on the afternoon of Wednesday, February 10th, about the situation in South America and the strength of the U.S. dollar, but we started by asking for his thoughts on recent price movements.
It's February, and we don't expect the markets to do good things in February, and they're certainly doing that. We've seen a little bit of a rally there last part of January and first part of February, and I say a little bit, emphasizing on little. And then the last few days the markets have gone back down, and like I say, it's February. Seasonally, you look at the charts, long-term charts on corn and beans, and very seldom see anything good in February.
What should we expect after February based on the historical charts?
Historical charts in general start out anywhere during the month of February, and usually will around the 1st of March start gradually eating their way higher and get a rally that lasts anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months based on that. Now, I don't want anybody to hold out their hopes that we're going to see a 3-month rally, but we could see a 2 or 3 weeks or a month of rally just based on the market being oversold and what the competition does. We've got some tremendous competition in the market right now from Brazil and Argentina, from the value of the dollar, from the price of gasoline and diesel fuel. All of those things are weighing on the markets, and some of them have to be done away with or out of the way before we expect very much in the grain markets.
Let's talk about a few of those things, and let's start in South America. How do you think South America specifically is weighing on markets here?
It's real interesting what's going on down there, because they had a presidential election, as we are going to have a presidential election, and the South American farmers were sort of stockpiling soybeans as a hedge against the possibility that the market's going to react violently to the election. And in fact, the market didn't react violently to the election, and so the farmers have sort of stopped worrying about it and are dumping their beans on the market, and that's one of the reasons the market in this country is having a hard time working its way higher.
You mentioned the strength of the dollar. What relationship do you see that having against corn and soybean prices?
Well, I judge that based on the comparison to Canadian currencies, because Canada is the only other governmental entity that I really watch in terms of the effect on U.S. farmers, and it's almost a direct one-to-one correlation between the strength of the loonie, which is the Canadian dollar, and the price of soybeans especially, but soybeans and corn. And so the lower the strength of the U.S. dollar, the higher the value of the Canadian dollar, and most U.S. farmers, including me, don't really have much of a grip on that, but it's Canadian farmers, it's the most important factor they have.
Focusing more locally, do you think basis can improve here as we close out February?
One of the things that we've got working against us there, and I really don't know what the status of this is the last week or so, but there was a lot of out of condition corn because we had a really big rain right at the end of harvest, and a lot of corn was piled on the ground, and you know, realistically that corn has got to be eaten through the system before there's much hope of the basis getting a lot better, because elevators that have grain stored on the ground and it got wet, they've got to deal with that before they're really very excited about adding to their inventory of corn and beans, but corn in general.
So as we close out, do you maintain a patient position right now, or do you have any price targets that you're starting to set looking out farther into spring?
Well, first of all, never sell grain in February. We've talked about that before, and I still believe in that. But also, I'd say the bin behind you is full of corn, and it's my corn, and basically when it gets to the point where the roads aren't so bad and we've got some time and can get a truck to haul it, probably around the first to the middle of March or late March is what I'll be looking for. And my corn is in good condition, and I just think you need to be thinking about moving it when anytime you can generate appropriate cash flow and you can get it out of there before it gets out of condition in the spring.
The latest export data for December shows corn exports were 12% lower than the previous year, and soybean shipments were nearly 18% below December 2014. Meat packers may soon be able to own hogs in Nebraska. With a vote to spare, state legislators in Nebraska's unicameral passed LB 176 late last week to end the packer ban in the pork industry. Packers are still barred from owning cattle in the state. A similar measure failed in the legislature's previous session, but Nebraska Extension Ag Law Specialist Dave Aiken says this bill adds important protections for farmers.
It passed. It got 2 more votes this time than it got last spring, which was enough to defeat the filibuster and enough to get it to the governor's desk. The big change was that they adopted amendments which established producer protections that go far beyond the federal minimums, and really I think probably stack up well against any other producer protections anywhere in the United States. In particular, there has to be a very prominent identification of how much money the contractor would have to invest in facilities, a cooling off period, 3-day minimum that you can back out of the contract if you change your mind, no confidentiality requirements. You can disclose the terms to your family, business associates, that type of thing. The big one for me is that the Department of Ag has very broad authority. If they feel that the contracts are unfair to producers, they can write regulations to make that unfairness go away. So to me, they took some very big steps in terms of trying to level the playing field between the packers and the contractors.
Dave says if Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts signs LB 176, it would take effect 3 months after the legislature adjourns. That would likely put the measure in place during July. The USDA is projecting net farm income will fall for the 3rd year in a row. The agency is forecasting 2016's mark at $54.8 billion, a 3% drop from 2015 and nearly 56% below the record producers set in 2013. The agency believes direct government farm payments will increase by more than 31% this year, with ag risk coverage and price loss coverage, ARC and PLC, accounting for nearly 2/3 of the total. The Nebraska Department of Agriculture announced this week beef from Nebraska will be shipped to Israel for the first time since 2003. Israel cut off imports that year due to a case of BSE in the U.S. Ag trade is prominent now with the Trans-Pacific Partnership among the top stories in ag policy. The National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, or NASDA, gathered in Washington, D.C. last week for its winter policy meeting. Nebraska's Director Greg Ibach serves as president of the group. We talked with Greg Wednesday about the TPP and GMO labeling, another topic at NASDA's meeting, but we began by focusing on China. While in Washington, Greg delivered letters to top ag officials urging them to advance their efforts to open up beef trade with the world's most populous nation. We started our discussion with Greg by asking him to give an update on that process.
From the conversations I've had with officials in China as well as with USDA and USTR officials, I think we're really close. China's agreed in principle that it's time to open up to U.S. beef. We just have to set the rules or the protocol for how that beef's going to enter that marketplace. And so what we ask Secretary Vilsack and Ambassador Froman to do is they've worked hard to get us this far. Let's get across the finish line before we have a change in administration, because I'm concerned if we don't finish it with the people we have in place that have been part of that negotiation process, that when we change administrations, we'll have new people come in and it might be like starting over.
But it is realistic to assume that at some point in the near future, U.S. beef will be in China?
Yes,
okay.
That we should be able to get our beef into China. They've agreed in principle. It's just figuring out those parameters.
How big is that market? Why is it so important to get into China?
That's an incredibly huge market, and they could overnight turn into our biggest Asian trading partner and even eclipse Japan, which is a very important market to us. But we're going to have to gain back market share, and we have other countries in there already. Australia set records last year with what they sent into that marketplace. So we're going to have to fight to get our market share, but hopefully, our high quality beef is a little bit different product than other countries, so I'm optimistic.
You mentioned Japan and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. How important, how big do you think that could be for agriculture?
I think the TPP is nothing but a win for agriculture. We see especially for Nebraska agriculture, we see our tariff rates on almost all of our key products, pork, beef, wheat, that are going into that marketplace right now come down drastically in the first few years of that agreement. TPP also sets a standard for how China interacts with that. We also have other countries that have come to fruition now that are saying we want in too. So that's more countries that come in. And then I think it also sets the stage for how Europe negotiates with us in TTIP.
Sort of on the same line as China there, are you worried about the timeline and how long it could take Congress to move on TPP?
Well, TPP is going to be a tricky vote in Congress. And there are the Democrats, with the labor union influence, it's hard for them to vote for it. Some Republicans have some concerns, and so I think it'll be a narrow window, maybe after in the lame duck session, where we can gather the votes and put the pressure to bring that agreement in.
One of the other aspects of the NASDA meeting was a discussion around GMO labeling, and certainly it's sort of on the coast to the upper north. Are there states that differ in their feelings about GMO labeling?
Well, I think that all states have some level of concern about a patchwork system where we might have 50 different sets of rules and regulations, and how that would work as far as interstate commerce and moving goods and products that are manufactured in your state around to other states. Maybe there's some states that, Vermont, I think, is pretty loyal to the idea that they think that GMOs should be labeled, where a lot of states like, maybe Nebraska would fall into this category, feel that, with an organic label that tells you there's no GMO product in that. So we already have a system in place, but Congress needs to make the decision, and it's, we're asking Congress right now. Senator Roberts is saying he's coming with a bill to to bring into place a uniform federal system rather than a state-by-state system.
Yeah, that's what's going to be the question. Have we found that it's difficult to get the two sides together on this?
You know, Senator Roberts and Senator Stabenow, the two leads for their parties on the Senate Ag Committee, haven't really reached an agreement on principle yet. You know, the House has passed, so the Senate, as soon as the Senate can come to agreement, hopefully the President would sign that bill. But I think that Senator Roberts seems to feel like he'll be able to get those votes in here very soon. July is when Vermont implements, so I think it's important that if we're going to do something, we get it done before July.
The National Association of State Departments of Agriculture is celebrating its 100th anniversary in 2016. It'll hold its annual meeting this September in Lincoln. Nebraska Extension held its 2016 Beef Feedlot Roundtables at 3 locations in Nebraska this week. In West Point Tuesday, we talked with Nebraska Extension's Matt Luebbe about water demands in the feed yard under situations of restriction. We asked Matt why producers might be concerned about a feedlot's water quantity.
You know, most of the water that's used for agricultural purposes is to grow the feed, and we often overlook the water quantity that's used in the feedlot, and that's an important component, especially when you look at some individual areas throughout the state.
Tell me about those areas that might be experiencing a problem.
You know, in western Nebraska, we're already experiencing shortages where there's limits on the quantity of water that can be pumped, and therefore the number of animals that can be there. And that is only going to increase in the future as we continue to use water.
How much is required in the feedlot?
You know, even during the summer, for animals producing at a high rate of gain, we're at about 9.5 to 10 gallons of water per day, just for direct water consumption.
Per animal?
Per animal.
So what requirements do the producers need to have in the future to ensure that they have the appropriate amount of water?
What the producers need to do is identify the peak times that they need that water. If their wells cannot keep up, or the municipal supplies that they might be hooked up with cannot keep up with that demand, then management changes need to be made so that they can ensure that there's enough for both rural and urban sectors.
Give me the high points of the day, the times when cattle most need water.
You know, the high points of the time of the day would be right after feeding, when the animals are consuming most of their feed intake, and during the hottest part of the day. And that would be in the middle of the day for most parts.
So how delicate is the balance? How difficult is it going to be to balance the needs between rural and urban in this situation?
It's going to be important for some feedlots, but as our urban sectors do grow and encroach on feedlots or other animal units, you know, they're always going to have that potential challenge.
What are the other high points that producers need to take home today?
I think if they figure out or determine when their peak demand is, they may need to consider water stores to make sure that they can keep up during periods of heat stress or other events that cause animals to consume more water.
You're just talking about tanks?
It would be both tanks and maybe a supply. If electricity goes out during the heat of the day and you're using a pump for groundwater, you might not have access to that.
Are there challenges that come along with tanks in terms of the quality of water that you're getting back, or making sure that you maintain appropriate quality?
You know, it'd be the same management decisions that you would make for your regular water tanks. You'll just want to make sure that you've had adequate quantity and a fresh supply, clean water.
Sorry, is this a problem in other states outside of Nebraska?
This certainly is a problem in the southern plains, especially in the Texas Panhandle and some other isolated areas where there's large urban sectors.
Next week, we'll talk with Nebraska Extension's Galen Erickson about using corn residues and distillers' grains. The February Nebraska Farmer asks you to imagine using Google Earth to zoom into a field on your farm and see different images and indices like vegetation, surface temperature, and evapotranspiration. This month's magazine says a new tool called Flux provides a way for producers to measure crop water use with the Google Earth engine. Flux was developed as a joint effort from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, the Desert Research Institute in Nevada, the University of Idaho, and Google. You can learn more about how this new tool can be used to manage irrigation in the February Nebraska Farmer. In a northeast Nebraska cornfield last summer, we showed you how rootworms could significantly damage corn. We talked with Nebraska Extension entomologist Tom Hunt then about the need for control and rotation. We talked with Tom again recently about the lessons that field can provide for growers in 2016.
Well, that was at our Haskell Ag Lab, the University of Nebraska Haskell Ag Lab, and that was our test plots for corn rootworm. What we do there is we plant corn on corn, and in the year previous to our test, we plant corn, and we plant late corn and corn with multiple maturities with the idea of sucking in beetles so that they lay their eggs, and so we have a good test the next year. And you saw the results of that last year. We had a lot of rootworms in the ground, and we had a variety of different treatments, different products, and control strategies to test. And you saw where we had little to no control strategy, we had corn that was almost unharvestable in some of those plots, all the way to very well protected corn in others. The other thing we saw there was it happened to be next to this study where we had been using a similar hybrid over and over again, a similar hybrid that had VT3, and we believe that there's possibly some resistance developing there as we had a reduced control of our VT3 or Cry3BB1 products in that particular test area also.
Compared to the damage you've seen in the past, how severe was that damage?
That was moderate. So it wasn't a high level of resistance if it was resistance. So it was moderate, but it was more than we would have expected in the other studies we've done with those products in the past on that field.
What does it mean for farmers as they can try to control rootworms this spring? Does it mean that you do recommend they do something specific?
Well, I think, if you have corn on corn, you have to think about problem of rootworm, particularly if you have corn last year that seemed to bring in a lot of beetles that would lay eggs. And so control tactics, there's a variety of them that work still, the conventional insecticides, but also the transgenics. But I would say one thing is to use a pyramid. That is a transgenic that has 2 different toxins that are different, targeting a corn rootworm. That is one method. If you can rotate, that's always a good method. And as we've told some farmers, and we've seen this happen with some farmers that have several fields, when we say rotation, it doesn't mean you have to rotate every field corn, soybean. You can also help reduce resistance and the development of resistance by rotating one of your fields every year to soybeans. So we have some farmers in some cattle producing areas, cattle feeding areas like Cumming County, that are doing that. Out of 4 fields, one field each year, it goes to soybean. And we think that will go a long way in helping reduce their problems.
If you are doing that continuous even for 2 or 3 years though, is it that much more important to select a different protein that you're using in those fields?
Exactly. Basically, it would be nice if you don't do the same thing twice in a row. Now, I understand, there are some practical issues with that, the number of proteins, the number of products we have. So you could set up a rotation of maybe 2 years of a particular hybrid package that you really like for 2 years, and then switch for the next 2 years to another tactic, either another protein, another pyramid, or maybe conventional insecticides. Then in the next 2 years, so you kind of have 6 years of, 2 years this, 2 years another product, 2 years another tactic. That's another way to go about rotation. It doesn't have to be that year-to-year type of rotation.
If it's a wet fall, does a late planted corn crop bring in a bigger threat of rootworms?
Not really. Basically, I would say the late planted or late maturing corn is one of the primary things that can bring in, it can suck in a lot of beetles in the area that will then lay eggs. The thing that has the most impact with respect to rain is, say, in the spring, when you have saturated fields during egg hatch, when those rootworm eggs are hatching, you can actually have high mortality. We did see that the last couple of years previous to last year, where we had a lot of low fields that had heavy rains and saturated soils for days at a time. Those fields where we would have expected rootworms to be had very few because they died. So rain can be to our advantage too in this case.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension Associate State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. During this last week, pretty benign conditions here across the state. We had a couple waves that moved through with this northwest flow aloft that did generate a few light flurries, but no significant accumulations reported anywhere across the state. Basically, the east was well below normal, and we had some of the western portions of the state that essentially were rotating back and forth between cool and warm, but overall, as an average for the week, we were a little bit above normal. Now, we have been pretty benign since our big storm system that moved through the Central Plains, as most of the energy has been directed toward the eastern United States. And there was a hint last week that the models were trying to flip toward a troughing pattern in the western United States as we moved into the second half of the month. Current models have pushed that off just slightly. Instead of coming out between the 16th and the 18th, we're looking at something that may be coming out more on the tune of the 20th to the 23rd. However, The models are flopping around a lot right now in relation to these troughs coming out of the western United States. So a lot of things can change over this next week, particularly as we get in late next week when the first trough comes across the northern plains. So pay attention to the weather, because as has been happened in the past, a lot of times these models will have the right scenario at first, back off, and then all of a sudden a major storm will appear out of the blue. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we have in store. First thing I'll draw your attention to is there's another wave that is expected to move and slide toward the southwest over the next 24 hours, giving us a light chance for precipitation across particularly northern Nebraska. Probably the first half of today, as this system rapidly moves toward the southeast, it will bring in a little bit cooler air across northeast, north central Nebraska, but we're still not expecting much in the way of any significant accumulations. And then as we get into tomorrow, we are going to see this trough deepen as it goes into the eastern United States, and another piece of energy is going to slide on the backside of this trough and work its way through western Nebraska, once again giving us a chance for some light precipitation. We may actually see some accumulations in portions of the Panhandle, north central Nebraska, and if we do, it'll be less than 2 inches. Now, as we get into Monday, what we're going to notice is that second system comes down and deepens this trough, and that keeps us in a northwest flow, so we're going to see some cooling conditions as we get into Monday, and some rather bitter conditions across the eastern part of the state. But as you get toward the western part of the state, you'll be more closer to the warmer air. And as we get into Tuesday, we're going to see the system rapidly weaken as it moves to the Great Lakes, and the ridge from the west starts to build in. That's going to bring much warmer temperatures into the majority of the state, outside the northeastern portion of the state, where another piece of energy moving on the backside of this weakening trough may generate some light snow flurry activity or some light sprinkles, depending on the timing of the event as we go in through Tuesday. Now, as we get into Wednesday, we start to see the ridge building back in, and here we do have one trough coming in the western United States, and this is the one we need to watch, because right now it keeps it as a low energy type trough moving through our region. But right now we're expecting to see a ridge building in the middle of the week, which gives us nice warming temperatures, a little break from the cool conditions, and that'll probably continue somewhat on Thursday, but you'll see this trough rapidly moves into the region according to the latest models, and that will generate some light precipitation, but the system will rapidly move to our east and be out of the region as we get into Friday, and we'll be more in a zonal flow with some warming temperatures. In terms of the precipitation temperature forecast, the 8 to 14 day forecast from next Thursday through the following Tuesday keeps a warm temperature across the majority of the country, and in terms of precipitation, a dry slot works into the western high plains.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean prices, U.S. beef export markets, water quantities in the feedlot, and corn rootworm control. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Galen Erickson will talk about the use of corn residues and distillers' grains. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.